In a world where only the strong survive, where omegas are shadows and alphas are gods, one act of impossible kindness would shatter every law. She saved 15 wolves from freezing to death. She had no idea one was the Alpha King, and that her mercy would rewrite the fate of every forgotten soul in the kingdom. The Frostmoon Pack has always preached survival of the fittest, and Ilaris has always been proof of what happens to those who don't measure up. While her pack mates display their strength through hunting prowess and territorial dominance, Ilaris tends to her herb garden and practices the gentle healing arts passed down from her grandmother, skills her alpha considers useless sentimentality. When the storm of the century descends on their mountain territory, the pack flees without hesitation, barely sparing her a backward glance. Her alpha's parting words echo in the howling wind. If you're strong enough, you'll live. If not, nature will correct our mistake in keeping you. Alone in her cabin as the temperature plummets to deadly lows, Ilaris prepares to face the longest night of her life. She has enough firewood for 3 days, preserved food for a week, and the stubborn will to prove, if only to herself, that she deserves to exist. But when she opens her door to gather more wood, she finds something that changes everything. A mass of fur and limbs, 15 wolves collapsed in a frozen heap, their breathing shallow, their heartbeats fading. Every instinct screams at her to close the door, to preserve her resources, to let nature take its course as her pack always taught her. Instead, Ilaris looks at their dying forms and thinks, if I let them die without trying, I become everything they said I was, weak, worthless, nothing. She grabs the nearest wolf by its scruff and begins to pull. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Omega. The mockery started before dawn, as it always did. Ilaris knelt in her small garden behind the Omega quarters, fingers dark, with soil, as she harvested the last of her winter berries. The frost had come early this year, threatening to kill everything she'd spent months cultivating. She worked quickly, carefully, whispering encouragement to each plant, as she'd been taught. Her grandmother used to say that herbs grew stronger when you spoke to them with kindness. Still talking to weeds, runt? Ilaris didn't need to look up to know it was Corin, one of Alpha Varric's favored hunters. His shadow fell across her garden like a stain. 3 more wolves flanked him, all broad-shouldered and smirking. They're not weeds, she said quietly, continuing her work. Winterberries can reduce fever. Moon petal helps with... No one cares. Corin's boot came down deliberately on a cluster of carefully tended silver moss. The delicate plant crushed beneath his heel, releasing its medicinal scent into the morning air. You know what would actually help the pack? If you could hunt, track, fight, literally anything useful. The other wolves laughed. Ilaris kept her hand steady as she gathered her basket, even as something sharp twisted in her chest. She'd spent 6 weeks nurturing that silver moss from seed. It was one of the rarest healing plants in the Northern Territories. Alpha Varric wants everyone at the gathering hall, Corin said, already turning away. Even useless omegas. Storm's coming. They left her kneeling in the dirt, their laughter echoing off the stone walls of the pack compound. Ilaris waited until their footsteps faded before she allowed herself to look at the destroyed silver moss. She could salvage some of it, maybe. She carefully scooped the crushed stems into her basket and stood, her knees aching from the cold ground. The gathering hall was chaos. Wolves rushed in every direction, hauling supplies, shouting orders, their anxiety sharp in the air. Ilaris pressed herself against the wall, trying to remain invisible, as Alpha Varric's voice boomed over the crowd. The storm will hit by nightfall. We're evacuating to the southern valleys immediately. Every able-bodied wolf will carry supplies. We move in 1 hour." "What about the Omegas?" someone called out. Varric's eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Alaris before moving on. "The strong take care of their own. If you can keep up, you're welcome to try." Alaris felt her stomach drop. She knew what that meant. In a pack of warriors and hunters, an Omega who spent her days with herbs and healing instead of combat training would be left behind. She'd slow them down. She always did. As the crowd dispersed into frantic preparation, Alaris slipped away unnoticed. She'd known this was coming the moment she'd seen the clouds gathering on the horizon. She'd been dismissed from training exercises, hunting parties, and territorial patrols her entire life. Why would an evacuation be any different? Her cabin sat at the eastern edge of pack territory, a small structure her grandmother had built decades ago. Most wolves lived in the main compound, but Alaris preferred the solitude. Out here, she could tend her garden and practice her healing without constant reminders of how little she mattered. She spent the next hours preparing for survival. Firewood stacked against the wall, high enough to last a week if she was careful. Dried meat and preserved vegetables arranged in her small pantry. Every jar of herbs and tinctures secured on their shelves. Her grandmother's old book of healing remedies, wrapped carefully in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. "You're being smart about this," she told herself, her voice too loud in the empty cabin. "You've survived alone before. You'll survive this, too." Through the window, she watched the last of the pack disappear down the mountain trail. No one came to check on her. No one even looked back. Alaris stood at her door as the first snowflakes began to fall, fat and heavy and unnaturally cold. The wind already carried the scent of the coming blizzard, sharp, aggressive, deadly. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt strangely calm. Her grandmother had survived in this cabin through 3 decades of winters. The old woman had taught Alaris everything she knew about healing, about the quiet strength it took to mend what others broke. "They think we're weak because we don't destroy," her grandmother had said during their last winter together. "But healing broken things is the bravest work there is, little one. Never forget that." Alaris touched the dried herbs hanging above her doorway, a blessing for protection and endurance. "I won't forget, grandmother," she whispered. "I promise." The temperature dropped as darkness fell, faster and harder than any storm she'd experienced. Alaris lit her fire, wrapped herself in furs, and tried not to think about how the pack was probably already safe in the southern valleys, warm and fed and together. She was rationing her first meal when she heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze. Howling, not the distant call of wolves communicating across territory, but the desperate, pain-filled cries of the dying. Multiple voices. Close. Too close. Alaris moved to her door, her hand trembling on the latch. Every instinct screamed at her to stay inside, to ignore it, to let the storm take whatever was out there. The pack had taught her well. Survival meant looking after yourself first. But her grandmother's voice echoed louder. Healing broken things is the bravest work there is. Alaris opened the door. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Snow swirled so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. But there, collapsed in a massive heap just beyond her threshold, were bodies. Fur and limbs and shallow breathing. Wolves, more than she could count at first glance. 15, she realized with growing horror. 15 wolves, frozen and dying in the snow, and she was the only one who could save them. Chapter 2, 15 Bodies in the Snow. The first wolf was the Hardest because Alaris had never tried to move something twice her size through waist-deep snow. She grabbed the nearest one, a gray-brown female with ice crystals forming on her muzzle, and pulled. The wolf didn't budge. Alaris repositioned, getting her arms under the wolf's chest, and tried again. Her boots slipped in the snow. Her shoulders screamed in protest. The wind tore at her clothes, already soaking through to her skin. "Come on," she gasped, digging her heels in and pulling with everything she had. "Come on, come on, come on." The wolf moved, 3 inches, then 6. Alaris's lungs burned as she dragged the dead weight across her threshold, the wolf's fur leaving a dark trail in the snow. She got the female inside and immediately went back for the next one. The second wolf was larger, a rust-colored male with a torn ear. Alaris's hands were already numb, her fingers barely able to grip his fur. She pulled him inch by agonizing inch, her breath coming in ragged sobs that had nothing to do with tears and everything to do with the cold, stealing the air from her lungs. 3 wolves. 4. 5. Her muscles stopped screaming and went silent, which she knew was worse. Her body was shutting down, redirecting blood away from her extremities to keep her core alive. Alaris wrapped her hands in strips of cloth torn from her spare cloak, but the fabric was soaked through within minutes. The wind had become a living thing, clawing at her face, trying to push her back inside where she belonged. 6. 7. She collapsed in the doorway after the 8th wolf, her legs simply refusing to hold her anymore. Through the snow, she could see the remaining bodies, 7 more, each one a mountain she didn't have the strength to climb. Her cabin was already crowded with unconscious wolves, their bodies pressed together, their breathing so shallow she had to watch carefully to see their chests rise and fall. "Get up," she told herself, but her voice was barely a whisper. "I get up. They're dying. Get up." Her grandmother's voice came to her, clear as if the old woman stood beside her. "The bravest work is the hardest work, little one. That's why so few are willing to do it." Alaris pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet. Her vision swam. She grabbed the 9th wolf and pulled. The world narrowed to a single repeated motion. Grab, pull, drag, grab, pull, drag. Her hands left bloody prints on white fur. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Twice she fell and couldn't remember getting back up, only that she must have because the next wolf was inside and she was standing in the snow again, reaching for another. 12 wolves, 13, 14. Alaris stood over the last 2, swaying. They were the largest of the group, warriors clearly built for battle. One had fur the color of winter steel, shot through with silver. The other was massive, easily twice the size of any wolf she'd ever seen, with midnight black fur and a presence that felt wrong somehow, even unconscious. His muzzle was scarred, his body marked with the evidence of countless fights survived. A leader. Had to be. She should take the silver one first. He was smaller, manageable. But something made Alaris kneel beside the black wolf instead. Even dying, even frozen, there was something about him that commanded attention. She touched his fur, coarse and thick, and so cold it burned her fingers, and felt the barest whisper of a heartbeat. "I've got you," she whispered, though he couldn't possibly hear her. "I promise. I've got you." Dragging him was impossible. He was too heavy, too large, her body too destroyed by exhaustion and cold. Alaris managed 5 feet before her legs gave out completely. She landed hard in the snow, her face pressed against ice, and for a long moment she simply lay there. This was it. This was where her strength ended. She'd saved 14 wolves, 14 more than anyone expected from a useless Omega. And it would have to be enough. But then she thought about this wolf dying alone in the snow while his packmate lay safe inside her cabin. She thought about what it meant to try and fail versus never trying at all. She thought about her grandmother, who had never given up on anything in her entire life. Alaris screamed into the wind, a raw primal sound that came from somewhere deeper than her lungs, and pulled. She didn't remember the last 50 feet, didn't remember getting him through the door or collapsing beside him on her cabin floor. Consciousness came and went in fragments, the warmth of the fire on her face, the press of bodies around her, the distant howl of the storm outside. When she finally managed to focus, she was sprawled across the black wolf's side, her fingers still tangled in his fur. The cabin was impossibly crowded, 15 massive bodies crammed into a space meant for one. They were all inside, every single one. Alaris tried to push herself up and failed. Her body had nothing left to give. But they were inside. They were out of the wind. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The black wolf's heartbeat fluttered against her cheek, slow, weak, but steady. She forced her hand to move, pressed her palm against his chest, and whispered the words her grandmother had taught her. The old healing prayer, the one she'd been forbidden to speak because Omegas don't have magic, girl, stop embarrassing yourself. But her grandmother had possessed it, and as Alaris felt warmth bloom beneath her palm, real warmth, spreading from her hand into the frozen wolf's body, she knew the truth. She had magic too, mercy magic, the rarest gift in all the territories, and the most forbidden. Don't die, she breathed, pouring everything she had left into that warmth. Please don't die. The black wolf's breathing deepened, just slightly, just enough. Alaris closed her eyes and let the darkness take her, her last conscious thought a prayer that they would all still be breathing when she woke, if she woke. Chapter 3. The warmth returns. Alaris woke to the sound of her own heartbeat, too fast, too loud, stuttering like a dying thing. Her body screamed at her to stay down, to rest, but 15 wolves were depending on her ability to move. She forced herself upright, biting back a whimper as her muscles protested. The cabin was dark except for the dying embers of her fire. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside the wolves were too still, too quiet, moving hurt, breathing hurt, existing hurt. Alaris didn't care. She fed the fire first, coaxing it back to life with shaking hands, then arranged her heating stones in the coals. While they warmed, she crawled between the wolves, checking pulses, breathing, body temperature. They were alive, but barely. Their cores were still dangerously cold, their bodies locked in a state between life and death. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Cold is a thief, little one. It steals warmth first, then consciousness, then life. You must give back what was stolen. Alaris retrieved her heating stones with cloth-wrapped hands and began placing them strategically, along spines, against bellies, near hearts. The wolves didn't stir, but their skin began to warm beneath her touch. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. The herbal stores came next. Winterberry tincture to stimulate blood flow, administered drop by drop between frozen jaws. Moon petal paste for the lungs, smeared on gums where it would absorb into the bloodstream. Thornroot tea, bitter and strong, heated over the fire and poured carefully down throats that could barely swallow. She worked through the night in a haze of exhaustion and determination, moving from wolf to wolf in an endless rotation. Apply herbs, check breathing, adjust heating stones, feed the fire, begin again. Her hands moved with practiced precision, even as her mind drifted, muscle memory taking over where consciousness failed. The gray-brown female first, then the rust-colored male with the torn ear, the silver warrior, a younger wolf with amber eyes. Each one received her full attention, her complete focus, as if they were the only patient in the world. But it still wasn't enough. She could feel them slipping away, their hearts growing fainter despite everything she'd done. Herbs and heat could only do so much against cold this severe, against death this determined. Alaris knelt beside the massive black wolf, the one she'd dragged in last, the one who'd nearly killed her with his weight, and pressed her palm to his chest. His heartbeat was barely perceptible, a ghost of a rhythm that threatened to stop entirely. "No," she whispered. "No, you don't get to die, not after everything." The mercy magic rose in her unbidden, a warm flood that started in her chest and flowed down her arm. Her grandmother had called it the rarest gift, the ability to share life force itself, to pour your own vitality into another. It was forbidden because it was dangerous, because Omegas who used it often gave too much and never woke up. Alaris didn't care. She closed her eyes and let the magic flow. Warmth poured from her into the black wolf, and she felt his heart strengthen beneath her palm, felt his breathing deepen, felt life return to him in slow, steady waves. When his heartbeat stabilized, she moved to the next wolf, then the next. She gave each one what they needed, holding nothing back, pulling from reserves she didn't know she possessed. The cabin began to warm, not from the fire, but from the magic itself, a golden glow that seemed to emanate from her hands. Dawn broke. Pale light filtered through the cracks in her shutters, and Alaris collapsed beside the fire, her body finally refusing to move another inch. She'd done everything she could, given everything she had. Now all she could do was wait. The first stirring came an hour later, a twitch of an ear, a deeper breath. The gray-brown female lifted her head, eyes unfocused, then settled back down with a soft whine. Then another wolf moved, and another. Like a wave spreading through the cabin, consciousness returned to her patients. Alaris watched through heavy-lidded eyes, too exhausted to feel relief, too wrung out to do anything but observe. The black wolf woke last. His silver eyes opened suddenly, with complete awareness, and locked onto Alaris where she knelt by the fire. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She'd never seen eyes like his, ancient and sharp, and carrying the weight of absolute authority. This was a wolf accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Who are you?" His voice was rough from cold and disuse, but it carried power even weakened. Alaris swallowed, her throat dry. "Nobody important. You are dying." The black wolf pulled himself into a sitting position with obvious effort. Around him the other wolves were doing the same, their movements slow and pained, but coordinated in a way that spoke of military discipline. They were watching her now, all of them, with varying expressions of confusion and wariness. "Nobody important," the black wolf repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. His gaze swept the crowded cabin, the heating stones, the herb jars, the careful arrangements of bodies. "Nobody important dragged 15 wolves through a killing storm. Nobody important brought us back from the edge of death." He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am King Zirak Nightfang, and you just saved the most powerful wolves in the realm." The words didn't register at first, couldn't register. Alaris stared at him, at the scars on his muzzle, at the silver eyes that she now realized weren't just unusual, they were royal, unmistakable, known across every territory. "No," she whispered, because her mind couldn't process it. "You can't be. The king wouldn't be. He wouldn't be out in a storm. He wouldn't be—" "We were returning from the northern border when the storm hit," Zerak said, quietly. "It came faster than anyone predicted. We had no time to seek proper shelter." His head tilted slightly. "What is your name?" "Alaris." It came out barely audible. "Of Frostmoon Pack." "Alaris of Frostmoon," Zerak repeated, and somehow her name sounded different in his mouth. Important. "You saved my life. You saved all of our lives. That is a debt the crown does not forget." Around him, the other wolves were rising fully now, and Alaris recognized what she should have seen immediately. The bearing, the scars, the coordinated movements, royal guards, elite warriors, the king's personal unit. And she'd dragged them through the snow like sacks of grain, fed them herbs like common patients, touched them with her forbidden magic. "I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear, I didn't know who you were. They were dying. I couldn't just—" "No," Zerak interrupted, his voice gentler now. "You couldn't, because that's not who you are." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "Tell me, Alaris of Frostmoon, where is the rest of your pack?" The question landed like a blow. Alaris looked away, unable to meet those silver eyes. "Gone. They evacuated before the storm. She swallowed hard. "I was left behind." Silence filled the cabin. When she finally found the courage to look up, Zerek's expression had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with rage. "They left you," he said flatly. "Their pack sister, alone, in this." "I'm just an Omega," Alaris whispered. "I slow them down." "Just an Omega," Zerak repeated, his voice carrying an edge that made the other wolves shift uncomfortably. "An Omega who saved the Alpha King and his entire guard while her pack abandoned her to die." He rose to his full height, towering over her even weakened. "Alaris of Frostmoon. When this storm clears, you're coming with us to Stormhaven, and your pack is going to answer for this." Chapter 4. The Journey. To Stormhaven, the storm broke on the third day, leaving the world wrapped in silence and blinding white. Alaris stood at her cabin door, watching the royal guard prepare for departure with military efficiency that made her feel even smaller than usual. "I can't go with you," she said for the 5th time, her voice barely carrying across the snow. "I don't belong at the capital. I should stay here and wait for my pack to return." Zerak looked up from where he was checking supplies, his silver eyes sharp even in the harsh morning light. "Your pack left you to die. They don't deserve your loyalty." "You don't understand." Alaris wrapped her arms around herself. The thin fabric of her dress, the only clean thing she owned, inadequate against the cold. "I'm nobody, an Omega. If I show up at the palace with the king, people will think, they'll say you saved my life," Zerak interrupted, crossing the distance between them in 3 strides. Up close, he overwhelming, massive, scarred, carrying an authority that made her want to bow her head. But his voice gentled. "Alaris, look at me." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "You're coming with us," he said quietly. "Not as a subject, not as an Omega, as an honored guest of the crown. Do you understand?" She didn't. Not really. But the way he looked at her, like she mattered, like her choice had value, made something crack in her chest. "I don't have anything to bring," she whispered. No proper clothes. No, bring your herbs. Zerak nodded toward her carefully organized shelves. Bring whatever matters to you. Everything else will be provided. So Ilaris packed her grandmother's book, her mortar and pestle, and jars of her most precious herbs into a worn leather bag. The royal guard waited with patient silence, though she caught a few of them watching her with expressions she couldn't read. Curiosity, maybe, or judgment. The journey began at midday, and Ilaris quickly understood. She was the weak link. The royal guard moved through the deep snow like it was nothing, their powerful bodies cutting paths that she struggled to follow. Within an hour she was falling behind, her shorter legs sinking with each step, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't complain. Complaining was what weak wolves did, and she'd had a lifetime of being reminded of her weakness. Enough. Zerak's voice cut through the sound of wind and movement. The entire guard stopped as one. He turned to look at Ilaris, who had fallen 20 feet behind, and something shifted in his expression. Lyrian. A silver-furred wolf stepped forward, the one she remembered as the second largest of the group she'd saved. He dipped his head respectfully to Zerak, then approached Ilaris with careful, measured movements. May I assist you? His voice was gentler than she expected from a warrior his size. Ilaris wanted to refuse, wanted to prove she could keep up, but her legs were shaking and they had miles to go. I don't want to slow everyone down. You're not slowing us down, Zerak said, and there was no judgment in his tone, just statement of fact. The storm damaged the roads. We're taking a careful pace regardless. He paused. Lyrian will help you. Let him. So Lyrian shifted his position to walk beside her, using his larger body to break the wind and his footsteps to create an easier path. The difference was immediate. Ilaris could actually breathe, could actually keep pace. Thank you, she murmured. You saved my life, Lyrian said simply. This is nothing. They traveled in silence for a while, the guard spreading out in formation around them. Ilaris noticed how they moved, always aware of each other, always protecting their weakest points. She'd never seen pack coordination like this. Frost Moon wolves competed with each other, jockeyed for position, left the weak behind. Tell me about your herbs, Zerak said suddenly, dropping back to walk on her other side. Thew, king of all territories, matching pace with an Omega who could barely manage the snow. Ilaris blinked up at him. My herbs? You used them to save us. I want to know how. It was the last thing she expected. Alphas didn't care about healing. They cared about strength, dominance, power. But Zerak was looking at her with genuine curiosity, so she began to explain. Winterberry for circulation, moon petal for the lungs, thorn root for revival. As she spoke, she forgot to be nervous, forgot to measure her words, fell into the comfortable rhythm of talking about something she actually understood. Your grandmother taught you all this? Zerak asked. Everything. Ilaris touched her bag, where the old book rested. She was the pack healer before she died, the best in the northern territories. And they let her teachings die with her, didn't train another healer. Ilaris's throat tightened. Alpha Varric said healing was a waste of resources, that strong wolves don't need to be coddled. Zerak's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. The silence stretched until Ilaris felt compelled to fill it. He's not wrong, she said quietly. If I'd been stronger, if I could hunt or fight, I wouldn't have been left behind. If you'd been different, Zerak said, his voice carrying an edge, 15 wolves would be dead, including me. He stopped walking, forcing the entire guard to halt. Strength isn't just teeth and claws, Ilaris. What you did, dragging wolves twice your size through a killing storm, using magic that could have killed you to save strangers. That's strength, real strength. Alaris stared at him, unable to form words. No one had ever called her strong, not once in her entire life. You said your magic was forbidden, Zerak continued, quieter now. Why? Because Omegas aren't supposed to have magic, and mercy magic is... She struggled to find the words. It's dangerous. My grandmother died using it. She gave too much to save a dying wolf and her heart stopped. But you used it anyway, on 15 strangers. They were dying. I couldn't just... Alaris broke off, frustrated with her inability to explain. Healing broken things is the bravest work there is. That's what she taught me. I had to try. Something shifted in Zerak's expression, a softness she hadn't seen before. My father used to say something similar, that the greatest power is knowing when to show mercy. He looked away, his gaze distant. He was killed for that belief. Challengers called him weak, said mercy had no place in a king. But you're still here, Alaris said before she could stop herself. You won. I won by being exactly what they expected. Brutal, merciless, strong. The word came out bitter. Every day I make decisions that require teeth and blood, and every day I wonder if there could be another way. His eyes found hers again. Then you dragged me out of the snow. Nobody important, just an Omega. And you proved that mercy is the rarest power of all. Alaris's breath caught. The way he looked at her, like she was something precious, something worth protecting, made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced. We should keep moving, Lyrian said gently, breaking the moment. Storm fronts can be unpredictable. They walked until dusk, and when they made camp, Zerak insisted Alaris take the warmest spot by the fire. The royal guard treated her with careful courtesy, and once, just once, she caught Zerak watching her with an expression that made her heart stutter. She fell asleep wondering what would happen when they reached Storm Haven, and what it meant that the king looked at her like she was someone who mattered. Chapter 5. The Court of Wolves. Stormhaven Palace rose from the mountainside like a crown of stone and ice, its towers reaching toward clouds that seemed to bow in deference. Alaris stopped at the gates, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of everything. The walls, the guards, the massive doors carved with scenes of ancient battles. It's too much, she whispered. I can't. Yes, you can. Zerak's voice was quiet but firm beside her. You dragged 15 wolves through a blizzard. You can walk through a door. But walking through that door meant entering a world where she didn't belong, and every wolf inside made sure she knew it. The throne room was cavernous, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls lined with wolves whose eyes tracked Alaris like predators watching prey. Courtiers in fine silks and polished armor, their postures radiating confidence and entitlement. And at the center, seated in a semicircle of ornate chairs, the High Council. Elder Mordain sat in the middle, ancient, gray-furred, his eyes sharp as broken glass. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. So, this is the Omega who supposedly saved the king's life. The word supposedly landed like a slap. Alaris felt her cheeks burn. There's no supposedly about it, Zerak said, his tone carrying warning. Alaris of Frostmoon saved myself and my entire guard. I owe her a life debt. How convenient. Another council member, a female with rust-colored fur and calculating eyes, leaned forward. The king returns from a diplomatic mission with an Omega he claims saved his life, an Omega from a pack of no standing, with no witnesses to corroborate the story. 15 witnesses, Lyrian interjected, stepping forward. The royal guard, We all owe Alaris our lives. The royal guard who serves at the king's pleasure. Mordane's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Forgive us if we question testimony from wolves whose loyalty to their king might color their recollections. Are you calling me a liar? Zerak's voice dropped to a dangerous register. I'm suggesting, Mordane said carefully, that the council has a duty to examine extraordinary claims, especially when those claims elevate an unknown Omega to a position of intimacy with the crown. Whispers erupted through the throne room like wildfire. Alaris wanted to disappear, to sink through the marble floor and never be seen again. This was a mistake. Coming here was a terrible mistake. The girl reeks of magic, a voice called from the crowd. Dark magic, everyone can smell it. Not dark magic. Mordane rose from his chair, moving with the deliberate grace of a much younger wolf. Mercy magic, if I'm not mistaken. A rare gift. Some might say suspiciously rare. He circled Alaris slowly, and she felt like a rabbit caught in a wolf's gaze. Tell me, girl, how does a simple Omega from an insignificant pack possess one of the most forbidden magics in the realm? Alaris's voice came out barely above a whisper. My grandmother. Your grandmother was investigated 20 years ago for practicing forbidden arts. Did you know that? Mordane tilted his head. She was cleared of wrongdoing, but the council has always had questions about the Thornheart line. Alaris's blood ran cold. She hadn't known. Her grandmother had never mentioned an investigation. What are you suggesting, Mordane? Zerak's voice cut through the room like a blade. I'm suggesting that this Omega appeared at precisely the right moment to save the king. I'm suggesting that mercy magic in the wrong hands can be used to create dependencies, to forge unnatural bonds, to ensnare even the strongest minds. Mordane's gaze never left Alaris. I'm suggesting that we should be very careful about welcoming unknown magic users into the heart of our kingdom. The throne room erupted in voices, some agreeing, some objecting, all of them talking about Alaris like she wasn't standing right there. Her hands shook, her chest tightened. This was exactly what she'd feared. They thought she'd manipulated Zerak, bewitched him, as if she could ever. Enough. Zerak's voice didn't rise in volume, but every wolf in the room fell silent. Alaris saved my life using her own life force. She collapsed from exhaustion. She asked for nothing in return. These are facts, not suspicions. He turned to face the council directly. I brought her here to honor her courage, not to subject her to this persecution. With respect, Your Majesty. Mordane's tone carried anything but respect. The council exists to protect the crown, even from itself. If this Omega has compromised your judgment through magical means, my judgment is sound. Then prove it. Mordane spread his hands. Allow the council to examine the girl, to verify her story, to ensure that her magic is as benevolent as she claims. His smile was cold, unless, of course, there's something to hide. Alaris felt the trap closing around her. If she refused, they'd say she was guilty. If she agreed, they'd find a way to twist whatever they discovered. There was no winning. There never had been. Not for wolves like her. I'll submit to examination, she heard herself say, her voice stronger than she felt. I have nothing to hide. Zerak's head whipped toward her. Alaris, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She met his eyes, trying to convey what she couldn't say aloud, that refusing would only make things worse for him. I want to prove I didn't, that I would never. Her voice cracked, that I'm not what they think I am. Something painful crossed Zerak's face, but he nodded slowly. The examination will be conducted fairly. with witnesses, and if the council finds no evidence of wrongdoing, this matter is closed, permanently. Of course, Your Majesty. Mordaine's smile widened. We live to serve. The council dismissed Ilaris with instructions to present herself for examination in 3 days. As the throne room emptied, courtiers whispered behind jeweled hands, their words floating back to her in fragments. Social climber, manipulation, how desperate must she have been? Ilaris stood frozen in the center of that vast room, smaller than she'd ever felt in her life. Don't listen to them. Lyrian appeared at her side, his presence steady and grounding. They're afraid of you. Afraid? Ilaris laughed, the sound brittle. I'm an Omega. I'm nobody. You're an Omega who saved the king's life and earned his respect. That makes you dangerous to wolves who rely on the old order. Lyrian's voice softened. You're stronger than you know, Ilaris. Don't let them take that from you. Zarak approached, his expression tight with barely controlled anger. I'm assigning you quarters in the palace, protected quarters. No one enters without my permission. He hesitated, then added quietly, I'm sorry. I thought bringing you here would honor you. Instead, I've put you in danger. This isn't your fault. Ilaris forced herself to meet his eyes. I knew I didn't belong here. You belong anywhere you choose to be. Zirak's hand moved as if to touch her, then dropped back to his side. In 3 days, you'll prove to the council what I already know, that your magic is real, that your courage is genuine, and that they're fools to question either. His voice dropped lower. And then we're changing every law that made you believe you're nobody. Ilaris wanted to believe him, but as a servant led her through endless corridors to her assigned quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd walked into a trap far more dangerous than any winter storm. The cold could only kill her body. This place could destroy everything she was. Chapter 6. The Trial of Mercy. The trial chamber was circular, its floor made of pale stone that showed every stain, every drop of blood from trials past. Ilaris stood at the center while hundreds of wolves filled the gallery above, their eyes boring into her like physical weight. Elder Mordain descended the stairs with ceremonial slowness, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The trial of mercy is ancient, he announced, his voice echoing. It separates true healers from charlatans, genuine magic from parlor tricks. The accused will be given a subject beyond saving. If her gifts are real, she will prove it. If not, he let the silence finish the threat. He placed the bundle on the stone floor and unwrapped it. Ilaris's breath stopped. The wolf cub was tiny. Perhaps 3 weeks old, its fur matted with blood, its breathing so shallow that its chest barely moved. Someone had hurt this baby deliberately, viciously. Deep wounds ran along its side, its leg bent at an unnatural angle, and one eye was swollen shut. What did you do? Ilaris dropped to her knees beside the cub, her hands hovering over its broken body. What did you do to this child? The cub was already dying, Mordain said without inflection. Wounded by a bear attack 3 days ago. We've kept it alive long enough for your examination. If you can truly heal as you claim, save it. If not, at least it will finally find peace. You used a dying baby for this? Ilaris looked up at him, horror and rage warring in her chest. You let it suffer for 3 days just to... The trial begins now, Mordain interrupted. You have no tools, no herbs, no assistance, only your magic if such magic exists. He stepped back. Begin. Ilaris forced herself to focus. The cub's pain was a physical thing, radiating off its small body in waves. She'd never healed injuries this severe, and never without her herbs and supplies. But she had her hands, she had her magic, she had her grandmother's voice in her memory. When there's nothing left but you and them, give them everything. She placed her palms on either side of the cub's tiny ribcage and closed her eyes. The mercy magic rose immediately, desperate and wild. It knew what was needed. Ilaris let it flow through her, pouring life force into the cub's failing body. She felt the cub's pain as if it were her own, the broken ribs, the torn flesh, the fever burning through its blood. Too much damage, a voice whispered in her mind. Too far gone. No. She pushed harder, drawing deeper from her own reserves. The cub's heartbeat strengthened beneath her hands, tentative at first, then stronger. Bones began to knit, flesh started to close, but the magic demanded a price for every second of healing, pulling from Ilaris's own vitality like water from a well running dry. Her vision blurred. The chamber spun. The Omega is struggling, someone said from above, their tone gleeful. Look at her. She's failing. Ilaris gritted her teeth and poured more into the cub. She felt her own heartbeat slow to match its accelerating rhythm, felt her body growing cold as warmth flowed into the small wolf. Her grandmother's warning echoed, "Mercy magic can heal anything, but only if you're willing to pay with your own life." She was willing. For this innocent life, for this baby who'd been used as a pawn, she was willing. The cub's breathing deepened, its wounds closed, leaving only pink new skin. Its broken legs straightened, with a soft click of bone sliding into place. Ilaris felt the moment the magic declared its work finished. The cub would live. She removed her hands and tried to stand. The world tilted violently. "Ilaris," Zerak's voice, distant and urgent. Her legs gave out. She was falling, the stone floor rushing up to meet her, and she didn't have the strength to stop it. Strong arms caught her before she hit ground, pulling her against a chest that smelled of pine and winter wind. "I've got you," Zerak murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I've got you." Ilaris tried to speak, to tell him the cub was alive, but darkness pulled at her consciousness. Through heavy eyelids, she saw the tiny wolf stand on shaking legs, saw it stumble toward its mother in the gallery above, a gray female weeping with relief. "She did it," someone breathed. By the ancient laws, she actually did it. "Impossible," Mordain said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "No Omega has that much power. It's not possible." Zerak's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. His arms tightened around Ilaris protectively. "She just proved it's possible. She proved everything I said was true. And she nearly killed herself doing it because you demanded a trial that no reasonable healer would survive. The trial is our right. The trial is over." Zerak stood, lifting Ilaris effortlessly. She passed. "The council will acknowledge this. Now." Mordain's jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke. "The council acknowledges that the Omega Ilaris possesses legitimate healing magic." The words came out stiff, forced. "She is cleared of all suspicion of dark arts." "Not enough," Zerak growled. "You will also acknowledge that she saved my life and the lives of my guard, that her magic is not only legitimate, but extraordinary, that she deserves the respect and protection of this court." The silence stretched. Ilaris could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes, the political calculations happening in the space between heartbeats. "The council acknowledges," Mordain finally said, "that Ilaris of Frostmoon is a healer of exceptional ability, who saved the king's life through legitimate magical means." He paused. She has earned a place of honor in Stormhaven. It wasn't enough. Alaris could hear the grudging tone, could sense the hostility still simmering beneath the formal words, but Xerac seemed satisfied, or at least appeased for the moment. "She'll recover in the royal wing," he announced, "under my personal protection. Anyone who questions her right to be here answers to me directly." He carried her from the chamber, and Alaris drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, his arms holding her like she was something precious. She heard whispers following them through the corridors, shock, speculation, scandal. "You're going to cause a war," she mumbled against his chest. "Let them try." Xerac's voice rumbled through her. "They have no idea what you're worth." "I'm just an Omega." "No." He stopped walking, adjusted his hold, and so he could look down at her. His silver eyes were intense, burning with something that made her breath catch. "You're Alaris, the wolf who saved a king, the healer who brought a dying cub back from the edge, the strongest person I've ever met, even if you can't see it yet." Alaris wanted to argue, to protest, but exhaustion pulled her under. Her last conscious thought was that she'd never felt safer than she did in the arms of the most dangerous wolf in the realm. When she woke 3 days later in a bed softer than clouds, Xerac was sitting in a chair beside her, his head bowed in what might have been sleep or prayer. The moment she stirred, his eyes opened. "You're awake," he said, relief flooding his expression. "Thank the ancient laws, you're awake." "The cub?" Alaris's voice came out raspy. "Thriving, driving his mother mad with energy." Xerac moved closer, his hand hovering near hers before settling on the bed covers. "You saved him. You saved yourself. And you proved to everyone, watching that, you're exactly who I said you were. I almost died. I know." His voice dropped to something raw. "I watched you pour your life into that cub, and I couldn't stop it, couldn't help you, could only stand there while you—" He broke off, jaw clenched. "Don't ever scare me like that again." Alaris looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the king to the wolf beneath, the one who'd carried her from the trial chamber like she mattered, the one who'd stayed by her bedside for 3 days, the one who was looking at her now like she was the most important thing in his world. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't apologize for being brave." Xerac's hand finally found hers, his fingers interlacing gently. "Just stay. Stay here, where I can protect you, where your magic can flourish without persecution, where you can be everything you were meant to be." And for the first time since arriving at Stormhaven, Alaris thought that maybe, just maybe, she could. Chapter 7. Shadows from Frostmoon. Alaris was in the palace gardens, testing her strength after days of recovery, when the scent hit her like a physical blow. Pine and leather and the particular musk of dominance that Frostmoon wolves wore like armor. She knew that scent, had feared it her entire life. Alpha Varric had come to Stormhaven. Her basket of herbs fell from nerveless fingers, spilling moon petal and winterberry across the stone path. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at her to make herself small, invisible, to disappear before he found her. "Alaris?" Lyrian's voice came from somewhere nearby. "What's wrong?" She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed, her body reverting to the learned helplessness of 2 decades under Varric's rule. Omegas don't speak unless spoken to. Omegas don't make trouble. Omegas exist to serve. "Your Majesty." Varric's voice carried across the garden, smooth as poison. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I came as soon as I heard the remarkable news about one of my pack members." Alaris forced herself to look up. Varric stood at the garden entrance with 3 of his enforcers, all of them radiating controlled aggression. He was broad-shouldered and rust-furred, his face carrying the kind of handsomeness that hid cruelty well. When his eyes found Alaris, his smile widened. "There you are, little one. We've been so worried." Xerac emerged from the palace, his expression carefully neutral. "Alpha Varric, this is unexpected." "I'm sure it is." Varric's tone suggested he knew exactly how unwelcome he was. "When I heard that Alaris had been found, that she'd survived that terrible storm, and even saved the king's life, I knew I had to come personally to ensure her well-being." He took a step toward Alaris. "To bring her home, where she belongs." "Alaris is a guest of the crown," Xerac said, his voice carrying warning. "She's recovering from severe magical exhaustion. She'll return to Frostmoon when, and if she chooses." Of course. Varric's hand spread in a gesture of false understanding. "I would never presume to contradict the king, but surely Alaris knows that her pack is her family, that we left her supplies, fully expecting she could weather the storm." He looked directly at Alaris now. "We never abandoned you, little one. Surely you know that." It was a lie. Alaris had watched them leave without a backward glance, had heard Varric's words about nature correcting their mistake, but contradicting an alpha was unthinkable. The conditioning ran too deep. "I understand," she whispered, hating herself for it. Something dangerous flickered across Xerac's face. "Perhaps we should discuss this in private, Alpha Varric, away from the gardens." "An excellent idea." They left, Varric and his enforcers following Xerac into the palace. Alaris stood frozen until Lyrian touched her shoulder gently. "Breathe," he said. "You're safe here. Xerac won't let Varric take you." But Alaris couldn't shake the fear. Varric always got what he wanted. Always. An hour later, a servant found her with a summons to the private council chamber. Alaris's hand shook as she followed, her mind spinning through scenarios, none of them good. When she entered, Varric's smile was triumphant. "Ah, there she is. Alaris, I was just telling His Majesty about Frostmoon's joy at your heroism. How proud we are that one of ours saved the king." "One of yours that you left to die," Xerac said flatly. "A miscommunication." Varric's expression never wavered. "You know how chaotic evacuations can be. But what matters now is Alaris's future, her place in Frostmoon." He turned to Alaris with practiced concern. "You must be so overwhelmed here, little one. All this opulence, these strange wolves. Wouldn't you feel more comfortable at home?" "She is home," Xerac said. "With respect, Your Majesty, Frostmoon has a legal claim to our pack members, especially unbonded Omegas." Varric's tone remained pleasant, but steel lay underneath. "Unless, of course, there's been a bonding I'm unaware of." The question hung in the air like a trap. If Xerac claimed a bond with Alaris, it would spark political chaos. If he didn't, Varric could legally demand her return. "I saved the king's life," Alaris heard herself say, her voice barely audible. "That gives me certain rights under ancient law. The right to petition for sanctuary." Varric's smile thinned. "You've been studying law, have you? How ambitious." He leaned forward. "Let me speak plainly, Alaris. You have a choice. Come home voluntarily, help Frostmoon benefit from your connection to the king, and be treated with the respect your new status deserves. Or refuse, and I'll make sure every wolf in the territory knows you abandoned your pack, that you're a traitor who used magic to seduce a king for personal gain. That's enough." Xerac's voice could have cut stone. "I'm simply explaining her options. Varric stood, his posture aggressive. Alaris knows how pack law works. She belongs to Frostmoon until she formally breaks her bonds or is claimed by another. Those are the rules, Your Majesty. Rules even kings must follow. After Varric left, promising to return tomorrow for Alaris's decision, Xerac paced the council chamber like a caged wolf. Alaris sat in a chair, her body numb, her mind racing. "He can't force you," Xerac said. "I won't allow it." "He doesn't have to force me." Alaris's voice came out flat. "You don't understand what he is, what he can do." "Then help me understand." She looked up at him, and something in his expression, the genuine concern, the controlled fury, made her walls crack. "When I was 8, I tried to run away from Frostmoon. I made it 3 miles before they caught me." She touched her shoulder absently, where a scar lay hidden beneath her dress. "Varric said I needed to learn that Omegas who abandon their pack get what they deserve. He let his enforcers hunt me." "For sport." Xerac went absolutely still. "He hunted you, a child. He said it was a lesson." Alaris's hands clenched in her lap. "And I learned to be small, to be quiet, to never question, because questioning meant pain. Resistance meant worse." She met his eyes. "That's what he'll do if I refuse him now. Maybe not to me directly. You'd stop him. But to other Omegas in Frostmoon, he'll make examples. He'll hurt people to punish me, and everyone will know it's my fault." "None of that would be your fault." Xerac knelt in front of her chair, his hands covering hers. "Alaris, listen to me. Varric is a tyrant who rules through fear, but fear only works if we let it." "You don't understand," she whispered. "I'm not brave like you think I am. I saved those wolves because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. But this, standing up to my alpha, that's different. That's terrifying," Xerac finished. "I know. But you're not alone anymore." His grip tightened. "Tomorrow, when Varric returns, I'll be beside you. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. If you want to return to Frostmoon, I'll negotiate terms that keep you safe. If you want to stay here, I'll find a legal way to make it happen. But I need you to know something first." "What?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words came out raw, unguarded. "I've been falling since the moment I woke up and saw you exhausted and afraid but still fighting to save strangers. And the thought of Varric taking you back to that place, of you being hurt again." His voice broke. "I can't. I won't. But this has to be your choice, Alaris. Not mine. Not Varric's. Yours." Alaris stared at him, her heart pounding. The king had just confessed he loved her. The most powerful wolf in the realm wanted her to stay, and all she had to do was find the courage to defy everything she'd ever been taught. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "Yes, you can." Xerac's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "You dragged 15 wolves through a blizzard. You nearly died saving a cub. You're the strongest person I know, even if you can't see it yet." That night, Alaris lay awake in her too-soft bed, Xerac's words echoing in her mind. Tomorrow, Varric would return. Tomorrow, she would have to choose. For the first time in her life, she wondered what it would feel like to choose herself. Chapter 8. The Winter's Moon Gala. The gown was the color of fresh snow at dawn, silver white with threads of pale gold woven through like captured sunlight. It fit Alaris perfectly, flowing around her like water, transforming her from a forgotten Omega into something that belonged in a palace. She stared at her reflection and didn't recognize herself. "You look like a queen," the handmaiden said, adjusting the delicate crown of winter flowers in Alaris's dark hair. "I look like I'm playing dress-up." Alaris whispered, but her hands were steady as she touched the gown's fabric. She'd made her choice last night, lying awake in the darkness. Tonight, she would either find the courage to claim it or lose herself forever. The ballroom stole her breath. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, their light reflecting off polished marble floors. Hundreds of wolves in their finest attire moved through the space like a living tapestry. Silks and jewels, power and privilege. Music swelled from an orchestra tucked in an alcove, the melody both haunting and hopeful. Alaris descended the grand staircase, acutely aware of every eye turning toward her. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. The Omega, the healer, the king's what? No one knew quite what to call her. Xerac stood at the base of the stairs, magnificent in formal black and silver. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression. Wonder and possessiveness and something deeper that made her chest tight. "You're breathtaking," he said quietly, offering his hand. "I'm terrified," she admitted, placing her fingers in his. "Good. So am I." His smile was gentle. "Being terrified means it matters." He led her into the ballroom, and the crowd parted like water. Alaris felt their stares, their judgment, their curiosity. But Xerac's hand remained steady in hers, anchoring her. They danced. Alaris had never learned formal dancing. Omegas didn't attend galas, but Xerac guided her through the steps with patient grace. The world narrowed to just them, his hand at her waist, her palm against his chest, where she could feel his heartbeat. "I meant what I said last night," Xerac murmured. "Every word." "I know." Alaris looked up at him, and for once she didn't look away. "I have something to tell you, too." But before she could speak, the music stopped, a deliberate, discordant halt that sent silence crashing through the ballroom. Alpha Varric stood on the dais where the orchestra had been playing, his presence commanding despite being uninvited to speak. His enforcers flanked him, and Alaris's blood turned to ice. "Forgive the interruption," Varric announced, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "But I couldn't let this evening proceed without addressing a matter of law and honor." "This is not the time, Varric." Xerac's voice held warning, but he didn't release Alaris's hand. "On the contrary, Your Majesty, this is precisely the time." Varric's gaze found Alaris, and his smile was cruel. "Before you make any announcements regarding Alaris of Frostmoon, the pack has a legal claim to address." Alaris felt Xerac tense beside her. This was it, the trap Varric had been building since he arrived. "I invoke the right of pack reclamation," Varric declared, his words formal and binding. "As Alpha of Frostmoon Pack, I claim sovereignty over all unbonded pack members. Alaris was born to Frostmoon, raised by Frostmoon, and belongs to Frostmoon. Any attempt to claim her without my consent violates ancient pack law." He paused, letting the words sink in. "She must return with me. Tonight." The ballroom erupted in whispers. Alaris saw Elder Mordain watching with undisguised satisfaction. Of course he'd known this was coming. The council wanted her gone, wanted this inconvenient Omega removed from their pristine court. "Pack law also recognizes the right of refusal," Xerac said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Alaris can reject your claim." "Can she?" Varric tilted his head. "Alaris, tell His Majesty and all these fine wolves, do you reject Frostmoon Pack? Do you reject the wolves who raised you, fed you, gave you shelter for 20 years? His tone shifted, became softer, more dangerous. "Think carefully, little one. If you reject your pack, you become Omega damned. No pack will ever accept you. And the Omegas still in Frostmoon, the ones who can't defend themselves, will pay the price for your betrayal. There it was, the real threat. Alaris felt her old conditioning slam into place like a cage door closing. He would hurt others to punish her. Children, maybe. Elderly wolves. The weak ones who couldn't escape his rage. Alaris. Zirak's hand squeezed hers. Don't let him do this. Don't let fear win. But fear was all she'd ever known. Fear was safe. Fear kept people alive. She looked at Varric, at his confident smile, his certain victory, and saw her entire future, returning to Frostmoon, being used as a political tool, watching her spirit die slowly while Varric elevated his pack status through her connection to the king, never healing again except by his permission, never having a choice again. Then she looked at Zirak, at the wolf who'd carried her from the trial chamber, who'd stayed by her bedside for 3 days, who'd called her strong even when she couldn't see it herself. You're wrong, Alaris said, her voice barely above a whisper. Varric's smile widened. About what, little one? About who raised me, who gave me shelter. Alaris's hand tightened on Zirak's. My grandmother raised me. She taught me that. Healing broken things is the bravest work there is, that mercy is the rarest power, that I had value even when everyone else said I was nothing. Her voice grew stronger. Frostmoon didn't give me anything except pain and dismissal. You left me to die in that storm, Alpha Varric. Don't pretend otherwise. Careful, Varric warned, his false pleasantness cracking. I'm done being careful. Alaris stepped forward, releasing Zirak's hand, not in retreat, but to stand on her own. I reject Frostmoon Pack. I reject your claim. I reject every lie you've told about loyalty and family, when all you've ever shown me is cruelty. The ballroom went absolutely silent. Varric's expression turned murderous. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. Those Omegas in Frostmoon, their suffering will be on your head. No. Zirak moved to stand beside Alaris, not in front of her, but alongside her. Their suffering will be on yours. And as of this moment, Frostmoon Pack is under crown. Investigation for abuse of its Omega population. Any retaliation against vulnerable pack members will be considered an act of treason. His voice dropped to something lethal. You wanted to play politics, Varric? Let's play. Varric's face flushed with rage. You can't. I can. I am. Zirak's hand found Alaris's again. And now I'm going to make the announcement I intended to make before you interrupted. He turned to face the ballroom, and Alaris saw tears in some wolves' eyes, shock in others. Alaris of Frostmoon. No, Alaris of Stormhaven saved my life and the lives of my guard. She proved her magic is real and her heart is pure. She's shown more courage in one season than most wolves show in a lifetime. He looked down at her, and his expression made her breath catch. And if she'll have me, she'll be my queen. The ballroom erupted, some in applause, others in outrage. Alaris heard Mordane's protest, Varric's furious objection, a dozen voices talking over each other. But all she could see was Zirak, watching her with hope and fear and love so naked it hurt to witness. Yes, she whispered, then louder so everyone could hear. Yes. Zirak pulled her into his arms and kissed her in front of the entire court, claiming her as publicly and undeniably as possible. When they finally broke apart, Alaris was crying and laughing and shaking with the enormity of what she'd just done. She'd burned down her cage, and for the first time in her life, she felt free. Chapter 9. The Queen's Decree. The coronation took place 3 weeks after the Winter's Moon Gala, giving Varric time to slink back to Frostmoon and the council time to accept what they couldn't change. Alaris stood before the throne room in a gown of deep crimson and gold, the traditional colors of Stormhaven royalty, and tried to quiet the voice in her head that still whispered she didn't belong here. But she was done listening to that voice. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of ancient words and sacred oils, the weight of the crown settling on her head, like a promise she was determined to keep. When it was finished, Xerac took her hand and faced the assembled court, hundreds of wolves from every territory, come to witness the impossible, an Omega becoming queen. "There's one more matter to address," Xerac announced, his voice carrying through the vast chamber. "My queen has something to say." He stepped back, giving her the floor. Alaris felt every eye upon her. Mordane's resentful gaze, Lyrian's encouraging smile, the curious stares of wolves who'd traveled from distant packs to see the healer who'd saved their king. She thought of her grandmother, of the small cabin where she'd dragged 15 dying wolves, of every time she'd been told she was nothing. "I have been an Omega my entire life," Alaris began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I know what it means to be dismissed, diminished, told that my existence is a burden others must bear. I know what it's like to be left behind, to be considered disposable, to have my gifts called worthless simply because they weren't violent enough to impress the strong." The room was absolutely silent. "But I also know what it means to heal, to save, to give everything I have for someone else's survival, not because I expected reward, but because it was right." She met Mordane's eyes directly. "I saved King Xerac and his guard because they were dying, not because I knew who they were, not to gain power or status, but because letting them die would have made me everything this world tried to force me to become: cold, selfish, cruel." "The Omega makes a pretty speech," someone muttered from the crowd. "I'm not finished." Alaris's voice cut through the interruption like a blade. "As your queen, my first decree is this: no wolf in this kingdom will ever again be classified as lesser because of their rank. Omegas will have the same legal rights as alphas and betas. They cannot be abandoned. They cannot be abused. They cannot be treated as property." She paused, letting the words settle. "Any pack leader who violates these protections will answer directly to the crown." The throne room erupted in voices, some approving, many outraged. Mordane rose from his seat, his expression thunderous. "This is madness," he declared. "You would overturn centuries of tradition for wolves who deserve to live without fear?" Xerac's voice carried absolute authority. "Yes, we would, and we are." He moved to stand beside Alaris again, united front. "The Queen's decree has my full support. It becomes law immediately. The Council will never—" "The Council serves at my pleasure," Xerac interrupted, "as does every wolf in this room. If you cannot accept that strength comes in many forms, that mercy is power, that every life has value regardless of rank, then perhaps you should reconsider your position." Mordane's jaw worked silently. Around him, other council members shifted, uncomfortably. Finally, he inclined his head in the barest acknowledgement of defeat. "As your Majesty's decree," he said through clenched teeth. Alaris felt something crack open in her chest. Not fear, but fierce, burning hope. "There's one more thing," she said, and this time her voice carried no hesitation. "I'm establishing the Mercy Sanctuary, a healing center where any wolf, regardless of rank, pack affiliation, or ability to pay, can receive care, where healers will be trained in the old ways my grandmother taught me, where no one will ever be turned away for being too weak, too damaged, or too difficult to save. Zerach's hand found hers, his fingers interlacing with silent support. The sanctuary will be built on the palace grounds, he added, under crown protection, the first of many we plan to establish throughout the kingdom. This time the approval was louder than the dissent. Ilaris saw tears in some eyes, hope in others. Not everyone in the court was against change. Not everyone had forgotten what it meant to be vulnerable. The ceremony concluded, and Ilaris was queen. Actually, impossibly queen. 3 months later, the Mercy Sanctuary opened its doors. Ilaris stood at the entrance of the beautiful stone building that had risen from the palace gardens, her heart pounding as she watched the first visitors approach. They came hesitantly, a young Omega female with a twisted leg, an elderly wolf who'd been cast out by his pack, a mother carrying a sick cub in her arms. "You're really the queen?" the young Omega asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The one who used to be like us?" "I still am like you," Ilaris said gently. "I always will be. Come inside. Let me help." The sanctuary filled slowly but steadily. Ilaris worked alongside the healers she'd trained, teaching them her grandmother's methods, sharing the knowledge that had once been called worthless. She used her mercy magic carefully, having learned to balance giving with self-preservation, and watched as wolves who'd arrived broken began to heal. In the evenings, Zerach would find her in the sanctuary gardens, often covered in herb dust or smelling of medicinal tinctures, and pull her close. "You're changing the world," he murmured one night, his arms wrapped around her as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. "We're changing the world," Ilaris corrected. "Together." "Together," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. Ilaris leaned into him and thought about the night she dragged 15 frozen wolves across her threshold. How terrified she'd been, how certain she would fail, how impossible it had seemed that mercy, her mercy, could matter. She thought about her grandmother's words, "Healing broken things is the bravest work there is." And she thought about all the wolves who would walk through the sanctuary doors in the years to come. The Omegas who'd been told they were nothing, the injured warriors who'd been cast aside, the sick, the scared, the forgotten. They would find healing here. They would find hope. From the sanctuary's main hall, she heard laughter. A young wolf who'd arrived yesterday barely able to walk was playing with other cubs, his leg properly set and splinted, his future no longer defined by his injury. "Your Majesty?" A healer appeared in the garden doorway. "There's a group from the northern territories. They heard about the sanctuary. They've been traveling for weeks." Ilaris squeezed Zerach's hand once, then released him. "Tell them I'm coming. Tell them they're safe now." As she walked back into the sanctuary, her sanctuary, built on mercy and maintained through love, Ilaris felt her grandmother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. She'd saved 15 wolves from freezing to death and discovered that one was a king. But in the end, she'd saved herself. She'd proven that the weak could become strong not by changing who they were, but by refusing to let the world's definition limit them. The last rays of sunlight caught the sanctuary's sign, carved in elegant script above the door. "In a world that worships strength, mercy is the rarest power of all." Ilaris smiled and went to greet the wolves who needed her. She was queen. She was healer. She was exactly who she was